Long-term projects and publishing are two things that aren't really often talked about much in the online space, and it can be difficult to know where to go if you want to learn more about them. And in my experience, as I kind of dive deeper into the process of publishing my first photo book, I am realizing that there's just so much to learn and so many different steps along the way. So in this episode today, I want to sit down with my friend Kyler Zeleny, who's a photographer who's published some works, and just talk to him about his experience and then also his process. If you're not familiar with Kyler's work, he's published 3 photo books to date, with a 4th one currently in the works. His first book, titled Out West, is the start of a trilogy that he's working on documenting the Canadian West. His second book, Found Polaroids, combines found images and fictional stories written by other creatives, and his third book, Crown Ditch in the Prairie Castle, was the second installment in the mentioned trilogy, with a 4th book, Bury Me in the Back 40, coming out next year and finalizing that series. So I've been a big fan of Kyler's work for a while now, and if you listen to my podcast, you probably heard the interview that I did with him on there, but we have been talking about doing another interview just to really kind of talk about some practical tips for this entire process. So that's what we're doing today, and also I just want to note that this conversation is just some kind of cut up selects from the interview that I'm going to organize into 3 different categories, but I'll probably post the entire uncut interview to the podcast if you want to check that out as well. And then one last thing, I'm going to post some timestamps below if there's specific kind of questions and answers that you want to jump around to. So let's jump into it. I wanted to start our conversation with a focus on projects themselves. How do you find ideas? How do you know what's worth pursuing? And how do you decide when a project is done? How have your projects started? And what do you think is like the best advice for someone who's maybe wanting to do a project but doesn't really know where to start or where to discover what might be, the direction?
Yeah, that's a tough one too. So when I first started out, and for the first book in the trilogy, which is Out West, and then even the second book that I produced, which was Found Polaroids, I should say that I've changed my modality a little bit, because I initially said that I always kind of worked with the book as that initial object towards that I'm working towards. And that's actually not true, because for those first 2 books, that's now my mode of operation now. But for those first 2 books, I was just trying to make a body of work. And through producing that work, I started to share it, and people started to say, like, this could be a book. And I guess that's kind of the moment. It just seemed like a good project, and then it seemed to have enough legs to be a physical book. And then there's also, at the same time, there's other projects that I was working on that just didn't end up having the same quality or intrigue or interest, right? So for myself and for others, those kind of get left behind. So I think a good general starting point is to try to have multiple projects on the go, and then dump half or more of them and focus on 1 or 2, and just continue to focus on that 1 or 2 until it's either complete and looks great, or you've quit that one and you've started a new one that you think is an even better idea. So I've always worked simply by, I guess, just trying to make the work, and then more recently trying to get that into book form. Right? But I think it's fine to also be okay to like let any of these projects go. Like I have like 3 ideas right now that I'm kind of working on. I can see them being books. I don't think all 3 are ever going to get done. But right now they could, like they could develop that way. But if it just piddles out and there's no value to it, then like that's okay. So I think to give advice to someone who's trying to start out is drum up a bunch of ideas, produce a bunch of work, even just some simple stuff, right? Like there's some test images. So one of the projects that I'm working on is in a specific area called Crow's Nest Pass in Alberta. It's a really like unique region, right where the mountains start to push up against the prairies. This transition space, and it's got a really interesting history with like bootlegging and some mine myths, things like this. And there's like tons of coal mines there and stuff. A rumored gold mine as well. So I've already kind of been going there a little bit and like shooting a little bit, but it hasn't gone any farther than that. And it might not, but there is that possibility that it will. But anyways, I mean, like what a person could also do is like do some test images, spend a little bit of time actually moving around a project, maybe even go to a location, don't even bring a camera, just think about the space, come back with a camera, shoot a little bit, and then put together like a 1 to 3 page document with a couple images with a description, where an idea of like where you want to take this or where you could take this, and start pitching that to people, even just friends, and see what their feedback is, or their like the photo community. And then another option is actually look at grants. That will also tell you if your project has institutional value. It's kind of a like, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to get work produced, but that's like definitely one of those avenues of that can validate what you're doing and also put some dollars behind your project to complete it. And within that grant, you can even pitch that you're going to be making a book and ask for funds towards that end.
You know what, too? It's such like, I love hearing your answer to that, because it's such great advice, but it's such simple advice, but it has so much value, I think, because I know this speaking from experience, but I think it's easy to like overcomplicate things. And this is something that I've been talking about. I actually just recorded a solo podcast I haven't put out yet, but just saying to yourself, I really want to start a project, and then like sitting at home for a week researching on the internet about what your project's going to be about, right? But I like, the more people I talk to, the more interviews I read, it often, so much of it just comes down to like going out and making work. And as you do, maybe you have a very loose idea, but as you start to pursue it, things reveal themselves, maybe, narrow your direction a little bit, take it in different ways. So to hear you, talking about having multiple projects going at a time, and some of them maybe didn't work, right? But it's like, as you pursue them, that's kind of the only way to find out where they're going to go, or if they're even going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but, failure is part of this process. And failure is very useful in the creative process. I don't think we understand well enough in our community how important failing is, and what failing looks like, and the lessons you can learn from it, right? So
it's an absolute must. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you picked out this simplistic piece of like, just produce work, is kind of what my message was in my long rambling piece.
But but okay.
That answer.
So I put this as, have you read this book? I don't know if you can see it. It's called Photo Work.
I haven't.
So
no.
it's by Aperture.
Yeah.
It's basically interviews with 40 different photographers. So there's like Robert Adams, there's Alex Soth, Paul Graham, like just a mega list. But it's like the same 10 questions asked to all of those photographers, and it's all about process. So it's like, when you go to start a project, how much of it is like intuition and how much of it is pre-planned? And like, so many of the answers are about going and making the work, and kind of like not setting out. Maybe like some people set out with like a loose idea, others set out with nothing, but it all kind of, most of it comes back to like going and making the work, and that's often where things start to reveal themselves. So I think it's so important.
For sure. There's so your work is, that kind of road-based culture, a lot of the stuff you've done in the States. And I think there's this conception that it's almost like where, it's the Kerouac style of actually going on the road and just doing like one trip. But it's like continuous iterations, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And right. And so it's, even with Kerouac, he actually just, like if you read the book, he's kind of done the same thing twice. He does 2 trips. He's rewrote the book twice. But even with my work, like it's journey based, right? Out west in Crown Ditch, and the Bury Me in the Back 40, which is the new one in the trilogy, which is about my home community.
Yeah.
It's not about just going once. It's a continuous return. And that has to be quite similar for your work, because you were on the road quite a bit photographing, right? And you'd probably drive some of these roads multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, like we did our massive road trip, and then I flew back out multiple times by myself, went to the same areas. So yeah, and you, like, the funny thing is you go to the same areas sometimes, and different things reveal themselves, right? So it's not like a one stop. Yeah.
I love the concept of returning to a town where I've made an image, and then trying to even just like, let's just mimic the same image, and it being totally different for whatever reason, even if it's the same time of day. But I guess my point is anyways that it's it's a process that, like, even on the simplistic, what seems to be a linear journey, you still return,
Yeah.
So for Out West, I did 2 years of shooting. So I came back, like I did the road trip, and then I reshot it, going to different towns, but working in the same, like picking apart what I did the first year, figuring out what's missing, what needs to be there. And same with Crown Ditch, is taking that over 3 years, doing a number of journeys into the rural prairies, trying to figure out what am I trying to say and what's missing. So I guess that's kind of like the next step, is like not only to start producing work, and is then to continue to produce that work and to ensure that you're being critical about it and asking yourself, like, what is it missing and what can kind of further it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that actually takes me right into the next thing I wanted to talk about. But, so the first part is actually just getting out and making work, right? Like exploring some areas that interest you, or some rough ideas you have, but just going out and making the work. But, for Crown Ditch, we talked about this before, but I love the idea that you kind of worked, I mean, you knew you wanted to make a book out of it, but you also worked under this kind of, these guidelines of, you're going to go and you're going to photograph prairie towns with populations of less than 1,000. So it's not like you didn't limit yourself to these really kind of strict guidelines and try and, come up with all the specifics beforehand, but you did have this loose kind of framework. So I'd love the idea of going out and just, being open to what you discover on the road. But I also love the idea of having this kind of loose framework. So I think that's a really, like, when you told me that, it really kind of clicked, and it's something that I've often spoke about to other people because and thought about with my own work. So was that something that, like, when did you decide that? And is there anything else you can kind of touch on for other people? Like ideas for something similar. Like different frameworks or different guidelines that you can work under.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point, or a good point. So for Out West, that was looking at Western Canada, so a giant geographical space, and that was only towns of 1,000 or less.
Yeah.
And then Crown Ditch shrunk a little bit. We cut out all of British Columbia because something different is going on there, and a lot of Manitoba, and we kind of included a little bit of Montana as well. And we expanded that to be a population of 10,000 or less. And I guess for me, like with Out West, it was just that was a decision I had made before shooting, and that type of like open world journey-esque photo projects are like, they just become they can be very large. Like, I mean, if you're going to look at a region, how do you look at a region and try to adequately understand what it is without like losing your mind or spending like decades, right? So,
Totally.
Yeah, those simple restrictions focus the project. I think it also it helps the person that's creating it. That's point one. So it helped me be able to hone and actually just still be sane with how do I can produce work that makes sense to this space. And then the second thing is I think it's a good hook too. Like it gives your viewer or your reader something to actually gravitate towards or connect with. Is like, okay, this is not only just a project about looking at prairie space, it's about looking at really small towns within prairie space. Mm-hmm. These dying towns that either have disappeared or are disappearing across the prairies in tens or even hundreds over certain decades. Like, it's incredible how many of these small towns existed and how they're all fading. But there's other ways to create restrictions as well. I mean, you could talk about even using specific cameras or specific times of day. You could shoot a whole project just at night. And there seems to be like a number of books that I've recently come across that have done that. And just by focusing on a specific community or region, but focusing just by photographing at night, people actually end up creating like these really interesting books. Like one is, I forget the name of the photographer. We did a book swap a while ago for Out West. I could pull it behind me if there's interest for that. But it's about Barcelona essentially just at night, and it creates this really interesting idea of like how do we go out and photograph a city, right? Like, what does Barcelona look like? And then also putting these limitations separate you from previous work. So I've never seen Barcelona photographed like that. To me, it's created this new concept of Barcelona that I think only that artist before he made the book had a concept of.
okay, so jumping in then to like, let's say someone is, found what kind of interests them. Maybe they've applied like a loose theme or framework to it, and maybe they feel very good about their work, and they've decided they want to make something out of it. And I know that this is going to be different for everyone, but like, how do you know, like how much work you need to produce, and how do you kind of like know when to call it quits and put the wraps on a project? And again, I know that's a tough one to answer because every project's going to be different, but like in your experience, how has that gone?
Actually, I really like that question. The found Polaroid book is different, so we can let's not even talk about that in terms of when to know when to stop, because that continues to go on and could for indefinitely. But Out West, Crown Ditch, those two, it's a weird thing. It's just a feeling. Like, it's as simple as saying like, I'm done working on this, and I did something specific with each of those projects too. Is I was using a different camera. So for Out West, it's a Yashica 124G, which I think you recently talked about.
For sure, yeah.
Which is
my favorites.
A lovely, it's a lovely camera for its price. And I really enjoyed shooting that and shooting the prairies and square. And towards the end of the second year, which is kind of around when the book was I was done working on it, I also started using a Pentax 6.7, and I started to shoot a little bit with that. And I guess it was kind of at that moment where I realized I'm kind of done with the Yashica. And I think this project's done too. I've done enough that I think that there's a book here. And then for Crown Ditch, kind of very similar, I used the Pentax 6.7. And then towards the end of that, at the third year, I started to use a Fuji medium format camera. And also kind of like, it's almost like I knew when I was done with the project, when I was done using the camera that was assigned for that project. And that was just, that's another one of those like limitations. But there's, we kind of had this conversation before where you shot a lot of your American stuff on different cameras, and you're kind of like, I don't know if it works. And that could work though. Like, that could be an approach in itself. Like, the consistency of subject matter is maybe enough that you don't need the consistency of the format.
Totally.
Whether it's film or 35 or 120 or whatever, so for me, I don't know, it was a feeling, and that was kind of then rationalized in the way that I was starting to move away from the camera that I was using for that project.
Up next, I wanted to talk about curating a project once you've finished making the work. How many images do you need? How do you go about sequencing? And how important is flow and variety? Okay, so I got to read you this one answer. So this is from Alex South.
Oh, what a privilege.
Yeah, so it's great. It's really...
reading
I know, it's like my audiobook career is starting now. This for me, though, was like a little bit of a light bulb moment. I'll explain why in a second. But so the
Can you read it with a bit of like Minnesota?
I can't. No, sorry. You're getting
St. Paul kind of
Canadian accent. That's it. So the question is, how do you know when a body of work is finished? So he says, this is a difficult question to answer. If photography were a true narrative art like filmmaking or fiction writing, you'd have certain narrative conventions like the feature-length film, the television program, the novel, the short story, etc. But photography functions more like poetry, and like contemporary poetry is usually free verse in nature. There are no standards for beginning, middle, and end. It's up to each photographer to create her own structure. And this, for me, was huge, I think, because, coming from like a filmmaking background and documentary films, like, there is an arc, and there's a very clear beginning, middle, and end, and there's a way that I work to do that. So now as I personally jump into this project work with my photography, the thing that has been a bit of a struggle is I find myself wanting to apply that, or not even wanting to, but just naturally trying to apply that to the work here. So I'll often look at photobooks and I'll analyze like the first image they use and the last image they use. And I'll be like, they often aren't these like standout beginning, middle, end type images, right? So I love this like poetry reference. It just like, for me, it was like this light bulb moment and really sparked things moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, South is not only a great photographer, his writing is lovely.
For sure.
And yeah, he has a lot of brilliant things to say about it. It's very much like poetry. It's visual poetry. And there is no formula. So it's, for you coming from a film background, it's interesting to, you're looking for a formula that doesn't exist, which is kind of like a fool's errand.
Oh, absolutely.
In a way. But it's something that like I've done, and, so many other people have tried to figure out is, how do you even like, how to put a rhythm, or how to even pace a book. And it's interesting that you mentioned like the first photo of many photo books is not really a standout. And that's kind of the way that like I think I work too, is it's almost like we're just introducing the concept and maybe laying down a bit of mystery, but we're not revealing too much too quickly.
Yeah.
And same with the end. It's very much, for a lot of photo books that I've looked at, the beginning and the end is soft. A very slow whimper at the end and a very slow build up at the beginning.
And it's funny, as you mentioned that, I think of like my work, my portfolio of the American West. I have this one image from the Salton and it's like this really wide composition of these two telephone poles on either side of a road, and there's a little sign off in the distance that says end, because like it's like for the end of the road. And like for me previously, that probably would have been like my go-to ending image, right? It's so like fitting, even though it isn't, right? So now it's just interesting. Like that's what I probably would have played out. Perfect, right? It's a sign that says the end.
Yeah.
Now I'm pretty glad I read this and I'm learning all this stuff, so I didn't do that.
Well, and so one of the parts, and this is kind of going back to the question that you either have posed or are about to pose is, what do you do when the work is shot? And then you start to build. This is something that I do, and I think it will work for other people as well. As I'll photograph, like let's just look at Crown Ditch, because that took place over 3 years. After the first year, I put together an edit, and I share that with people, and I ask them, "This is what I'm trying to do. What's missing?" And I ask myself that as well. And then they would tell me, or I would tell myself, or I'd, think I had an idea, and I'd go out and shoot what I think is missing. Okay, after the first year, I was still missing some close-up portraits and a few more environmental portraits. Okay, I'll go and get that. So shoot the second year, build that out, do the same thing, create a sequence and an edit of what it looks like after 2 years, shop that around to some friends, ask them what they think. These are the images. And, came back with some feedback, because we still actually need some like female characters. There's not enough female characters within this project, it's too male dominated, which when we photograph like a lot of these spaces, it seems to kind of like, or even the idea of the West is kind of often built, there's like a masculine based kind of narrative to it, which is only really half the truth, of how the space operates. Right. So for the third year, it was also about photographing strong, female characters that inhabit these spaces. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, once the work is produced, even if it's just produced in over 1 year, and then we're going to return to it, make an edit of that work, and then share that with people to get feedback. So that's also one of those gives and takes, where it's you can have other people tell you when the work is seemingly done or not. As well.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. And just, I'm curious if you like, what do you think's good advice or like good practice for someone who maybe has never like curated their work or sequenced their work? Like, is that looking at other photo books, other artists' work? Like, is there anything that you found helpful?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a way to pay to get some of that stuff done. You can, there's workshops and whatnot you can go to that, but I would say those are kind of a waste and they're expensive. So try to stay away from those. Anything or anyone that's asking you to pay a bunch of money to further your practice in this regard is looking to make money off of you. And there are communities and people out there that, even personally, like people have approached me, like I've done a couple, talks here and there, and then I'll get a photo student after say like, hey, do you mind if I send you some work? Do you mind looking at it? I say, absolutely, would love to. I can help you with that process because it's like a give and take and it's enjoyable. And people have helped me, at the same lengths that I would like to help others. A big thing for me for Out West was just that it came out of me doing my master's. And so I kind of leaned on the few people in that program that I thought understood what I was doing and asked them to pass along their thoughts. But yeah, I mean, like another great way, if you're not doing an actual program, is find your local community or find your online community or go to books. There's really so many options. And I don't know, I think this is a really good community too. Like just thinking about this like loose idea of either fine art books or social documentary work or, just photo-based projects. There's a solid community and I think people generally are quite receptive when you reach out asking for advice.
So yeah, when it comes to actual like amount of content, again, I know this can vary so much, but if someone say wants to go like the book route, what do you think is like a minimum and a maximum? Again, obviously there's no like set rules or anything, but like if someone's creating content and they want to make a book, what's like a good range to aim for in terms of like finished, like number of kind of finished selected images kind of thing?
40 to 60.
40 to 60.
Yeah. But I'd be open to seeing anywhere between 1 and 100.
One might be a bit of a tough sell for people.
Well, I'm trying to think. There's a book, I'm looking at it right now, Nikolai Howalt. It's called Old Tijo, Tikko, Tjikko. It's a whole book about a tree. So we can maybe, they're all like, the images are all different lighting conditions, weather, atmospheric conditions, but it's essentially a book around a tree. I also love books like that too, where it doesn't need to be a large, complicated project like the ones that we do. It could be something as simple as looking at an old tree that has some sort of social or spiritual role within a community, right? But generally, it's nice to have between 40 and 60 images. I think that's kind of the play. I don't think there's many books that I would close and say that had too few images. Like it's usually the other way around, where that book had too many images. And I can think of one book that was released recently about the Canadian prairies where it had way too many images. It could be edited down to 1/3 the size of the book.
Wow.
And it would have been significantly stronger. And I think it's knowing what to leave in and knowing what to take out is very important. I think that's sometimes an underrated and something that I also have difficulty with. And that's when you kind of need to be working with a bookmaker or an editor in general, because you become really connected and tied to images. You become too close to the work. So it's great when you can have someone tell you, you should take this out because you already have this, or you can take this out because it's not that strong and I don't think it's adding to the narrative. And either you have to justify why it is, or you take it out. And that's like the cutting room floor is where like the tough decisions are kind of made too.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. I know we talked a little bit before we were rolling about this one topic in terms of like what types of images you make for a project, talking about, say, like these greatest hits or like these very loud images. And I think for someone who has never put together a body of work before and maybe is just presented their work online on social media, it can be really easy to get trapped in this cycle of feedback is driving the type of images you make because you want to put out more that, people react to and respond to in in a positive way. But the thing that I've certainly realized, not that that has been my intention with my work at all, but the more I dive into trying to assemble a body of work and even viewing other people's work, I've realized like not every image is loud, not every image is screaming at you, and you need this kind of balance and this variety for this flow when you're putting together, a number of images together. And I guess that ties into like what you're talking about, right? Like maybe cutting out some images that could be very, very loud, but maybe aren't necessary.
Yeah, the way that I've worked, and we can even just think about like Crown Ditch, is there's some really, really simple images within that book. And that's to me a representation of actually how I see the space. Like, the prairies are a really simple landscape,
Mm-hmm.
really quiet, banal landscape, visually banal. And you can mythologize the space, and you can focus on elements, really any space. You can focus on elements that are going to make it seem loud, and you can shoot the whole thing as if it was like a Coen Brothers, Fargo of the North, right? But every space has its own like tempo, and I was trying to match for that book. I was trying to match the tempo of the space as I understood it, and so you maybe you leave some of those greatest hits on the cutting room floor so that you can make space for those quiet notes. And if we return to the idea of like thinking about a photo book as a song, you have those low points, those, so that you can let those images that are loud speak so much louder.
Not everything's a guitar solo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, right? Come on. 4-minute solos. That's what I want to listen to.
Yeah.
No, it's a really good point, though. And I think that is something that's important, really important, I think, for people to understand, because it obviously influences the decisions you make when you're sequencing or curating or selecting for your body work, but it also influences the decisions you make when you're out shooting photos. Maybe it, you make some images that I guess maybe your focus is a bit different when you're thinking of variety, when you're thinking of, impact of certain images and stuff like that. Again, speaking from my experience, that's certainly been the way recently, when I've been out shooting, just looking for things that I maybe necessarily wouldn't have shot before, but now feel very right to fit in with the flow of everything else.
Yeah. And so this is worth coming back to, something we were talking about earlier before the podcast, this idea of how social media is really starting to form the way that people produce content. Mm-hmm. And so for us as photographers, it's how we produce photos. So use the analogy of the news reporter. The news reporter has an idea, goes to the editor. The editor shuts it down, doesn't like the idea. Well, the next time that news reporter has that idea, he doesn't go to the editor because he knows it's going to get shot down. The third time, the news reporter doesn't even have the idea. So that path of thinking and what could be a modality for creating new work and thinking about things differently gets cut off. And so one of my fears is if we're continuing to look at feedback from like Instagram and we're basing things on likes, because we've all done that. We've posted a photo that we like and it doesn't get the reaction we think it does. And then we've also posted a photo that we, weren't too hot on, but people seem to connect with. And it's just really interesting. I think we sometimes listen to that too much. And I think what you're doing right now is proper and perfect in that and it's still important to kind of listen to that community. But, a like is not an in-depth conversation with another photographer about a concept, right? Mm-hmm. It's so ephemeral and it's so without thought. And it's usually now about what's bright and what is, like Instagram doesn't lend itself well to large format photography. If you are producing work that's supposed to be 50 inches wide, it likely or possibly is not going to look good on a screen. It's designed in a different way, right?
For sure, yeah.
So that's also modifying the way that we work. So the fact that you're in tune with that and cognizant of it means that as you're looking for things that you previously haven't seen, you might be producing a new way of seeing, at least for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's super valuable as you as an artist progressing.
For the last part of our conversation, I wanted to talk about publishing, including things like designing a book, different creative elements, finding and working with a publisher, and also something that's really important, costs and profits. this is, I think, another kind of area of mystery, right? Because it's like, you either know nothing about it in a sense that like your only exposure to bookmaking is like whatever like photo album websites there are where you can like print out like a book of your trip to Cuba, or you just have no idea at all, right? And you see people putting out books and you wonder like, there's not like there's no website where you go on and it's like everything is catered to you like most things nowadays in our lives. So for someone who maybe wants to start pursuing that process, like where do you go? Who do you talk to? Like what's a good direction to go in?
Yeah, that's tough. And I still think the same law that applies in so many industries applies here. Is it's a lot of who you know. Mm-hmm. And so I've worked with, for the 4 books that I've done, including that little pocketbook on essays, it's been with 2 publishers. So 3 have been with the Velvet Cell, and 1 has been with Ain't Bad. And I knew both the publishers personally before I ever pitched my work to them. Like I knew them as individuals. And I really do wonder like how much, you can start to like, you look at, I don't want to give names away but some publishers, I'm thinking of one right now, is they kind of just build a publishing house around their friends. And, their friends are talented photographers, but you can see how there's almost like a bit of gatekeeping going on with some publishing houses. And I think it especially with the bigger publishing houses, if you have connection or contact with individuals there already, you're more likely to succeed. But that's not in any way a total truth, because if you have good quality work and they see it, they're going to be interested. So is it there is
So is it no? So I was just going to say. So is it a matter? Like, let's say no one. Is it a matter then of like just starting to reach out to some people, pitch your work a little bit?
People talk about the idea of doing like portfolio reviews, and there's a bunch of big ones. I've done one before, and I ended up meeting a publisher there that said it was for Crown Ditch. Is like, when this book is done, we'd be interested in it. And then we can talk about like later on what happened, because I did end up reaching out to them, and didn't end up doing the book with them though. So you can go to portfolio reviews. That's a good way to get seen. But there's no guarantees there. Honestly, what I think is the easiest is to either send an email with the work attached. They'll look at it, and if it's good enough, they'll take it into consideration. But you also have to be cognizant of, especially the bigger publishers, that they got a lot of work being sent to them. Mm-hmm. Or you can do something different, which is actually what I did for Crown Ditch. Is I made these little postcard boxes with images from the project, in a nice band, in a nice box with, the name Crown Ditch and the Prayer Castle written on top, and a handwritten postcard where I'm just saying, hey, would love to work with you guys. This is the project. Here's the link if you want to see the full dummy book flip through. I sent those out to a number of publishers. Yeah, because you also have to the idea was to how can we actually stand out?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, so I sent that to a bunch of publishers, and didn't end up doing a book with any of them. There was 2 that responded back to me, and the rest kind of declined on it. And the one publisher that I did the book with, the Velvet Cell, I didn't even send one to, because he was a friend. So I just, we had a different conversation already occurring.
But you know what? I'm a big believer, and it's like somehow that going to the efforts of doing that still, created some sort of energy that, led to your opportunity with the Velvet Cell. I mean, I know that doesn't really make much sense, but I think I think it's important to recognize the fact that you went and you worked, right? Like you went beyond just copy and pasting a templated email to 10 mm-hmm. people and hoping that something would happen, right? Like you went and you made these portfolio boxes, you went to the efforts of sending them out to people. Yeah. And then, something happened.
They might exist somewhere, and, maybe the next book they'd be more interested in. And, but I mean, my philosophy is just to, I don't like to leave things I wouldn't like the idea of like, I didn't do that extra bit of work. And because of that, I didn't get that opportunity. I'd rather just do the work and realize that I didn't get the opportunity through doing the work.
For sure.
So then I at least know I've done the work, right? Like I've done what I can, and I'm complacent or happy with the fact that I've done that, if that makes sense.
Okay, so let's say now you've found a publisher and you're going to start putting the book together. One thing that really interests me is just the variety in photo books, depending on whose book you look at, right? So there's so many, like, obviously there's going to be the images in there, but there's so many different ways you can lay them out, pair them, sequence them. But then not only that, there's other like creative elements. So when I think of Crown Ditch, you have these like fold out spreads, which are amazing. I believe you have like a map of your like destinations, right?
Yeah.
Which is in like a little insert. And then at the back of the book, you also have like a pull out, what would you call it? Not a pamphlet,
a book,
but it's
like
like
a
has like
booklet of essays, 2 essays.
Yeah. So like the point being that there's all these added kind of creative elements in that book. So like, how did you decide on those specific things? And like, what are your thoughts on adding those into photo books? Like, is it very kind of specific based on the artist? Do they need them? Do they not need them, kind of thing?
Yeah. And those, they kind of just developed. So I don't know. A lot of it comes from looking at other books and seeing what other artists have done for myself. And, I've seen other artists do gatefolds, those fold out images or pages. And I'm like, wow, those make an impact. And if you're choosing the right images with that extra fold or 2 folds, it could definitely make a statement, right? I'm trying to think if I've actually seen a photo book where someone added an element that I didn't think fit. And I think overwhelmingly, maybe in totality, that to the point that I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and maybe I've not come across it. Every time someone takes a little bit more care in producing that book and making it more intimate and unique, it usually, so far for me at least, I've found is it does add to the overall feel and concept of the book. I think the form should fit the project as well, and so sometimes a project just doesn't merit some of these add-ons or these pieces.
I love the fact though that it's like it is this opportunity to add like another little kind of unique signature to the project as a whole. And I've thought about it a lot, actually, like how much of a necessity those things are. But I like how you mentioned, Crown Ditch, you had a bunch of these elements, and in the next book you actually aren't going to. And it just, kind of goes to show that it can be very different for each book that you put out based, I guess, on, what, like the overall feel and structure of them.
Yeah. And, so just speaking about the new book that I'm working on, Bury Me in the Back 40, I'm actually using, because it's about my, home community, I'm using the community history book from 1980 as actually like the base of the book. So similar to Christian Patterson's Bottom of the Lake, or like the Holy Bible that Mac produced, it's going to have that original source text from the community plus my adaptations of the archives and the images placed over top. So for that, it would be too much to complicate it. I think you'd end up over designing a book, right? So it really does depend on like what your end goal is, what the project is. But so I would generally say that a little more is always a positive thing, but sometimes more can be less.
For sure. Yeah, there's a delicate balance almost, eh?
Yeah. But so far, like honestly, like the best way to figure out if you're trying to make a book and you want to add an element like that, like just look at other photo books. See what they have done. Has it worked for them? Can it work for you? I can't stress how important it is, and maybe you can speak to this too, is just looking at other people's work in photo books and how beneficial that is, not only to, potentially you being an artist that wants to make a photo book, but then you just being an artist wanting to produce work.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, man. It's almost like whenever I've done it, it's a way to like answer questions or give me assurance for specific things that are on my mind. Like we spoke before, about my project being shot multi-format, and with the type of person I am and how specific I am with things, that was like looming, like these different aspect ratios. Yeah. But then as I've looked at photo books since, where they've combined, like I have one here that's like square, 4x5 and 35 mil all in the same book. And I'm like, I didn't even like it didn't even throw me off at all until I stopped and I was like, oh, whoa, like, wait a minute, they're combining formats here and it works completely fine. So for me, that like gives me assurance now, like, yeah, this is something that people have done. It's something that works. Not something I'm doing moving forward with other projects, but it does work.
I mean, if we're talking about making books, we're in the business of printed matter, physical matter, and so we need physical matter to look at. Like, I think it's very seldom a person has a good enough visualization of a project where they can see the vision without having to look at other, source text or materials. Like, that's very impressive. I wish photo books were one of those things that, like proper photo books. There's so many now. I wish they were things that could be more accessible to the public. That's also like one of the criticisms I have with producing these is they are more expensive. Mm-hmm. Like there's no money in this. I do want to talk about finances later because I think that's one of the most fascinating parts about this whole process is. Wait
a minute, hang on. This is my like retirement plan, making a book. So don't like burst it for me, man.
It might be a short retirement. I don't know.
One day.
One day. Yeah, I mean,
that is
another thing.
Oh, go ahead. No. I wanted to finish with that, so let's continue your thought. Yeah,
I mean, you can try to go to libraries. Universities do usually have a good selection of art books, photo art books. So don't feel, this is general advice. Don't feel like you need to start collecting, especially if you're younger and you're, like books aren't cheap, so, or buy a few and get friends to buy a few and do little photo book, shares. Mm-hmm. Even just sitting around a table discussing, I think is a great thing. And something I've done with a few people kind of personally, but would love to actually, when I was in Toronto, that would have been a great space to actually have those, like, be more of a formal thing. We talked about it with a couple friends of mine, but it never got off the ground, and now I'm, back in the West. So, but there's options, and there's ways to be creative. The answer isn't to buy photo books. It is one of the answers. It's not the answer. So, and the larger the city you're in, the more access they have to material. If you're in universities, which is even if you're not a student, you can still access a lot of these spaces, at least in Canada. And if you are a student, then you also have the ability to get source material sent from different libraries to your library if you're very interested in a specific photo book. And that's that or spend thousands of dollars on books.
Well, you know what though? I know in my experience, even just owning a few starts giving you ideas, starts helping you discover different things that maybe you didn't know about before. So as much as I want to kind of build my collection up too, I know from my experience, just the few that I've invested in so far have even allowed me to discover things that I didn't know about before, even materials, different sizes,
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing a variety of different choices made between books and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the options are endless, and like it's boundless. Even just like paper stock, types of paper, thickness, like even the amount of white that's in a piece of paper. So for that, it's nice to have a working relationship with either a designer, if you're going a self-publishing route, or the photo book publisher to help you figure out what actually makes sense.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. So last topic then, kind of touched on it briefly there, but costs. Cause this is, it's not, as I dive into the process more, I've certainly realized quickly that it's not a cheap endeavor up front, and it's also not really the type of thing that, like you said, is a money maker. But obviously you have a lot more experience than I do with this, considering you've put out four or five books now. So again, this is going to be so dependent on like page count, material size, creative elements, all that kind of stuff. But like, maybe we could just give people like a general idea of like what the cost might be for like your average photo book. And again, not to like reference, but just if someone's coming into this and they know nothing about how much that cost is involved.
Yeah. So, and it really varies too. So that's worth talking about. If you work with specific publishers, what will they do for you, and what do you have to do for them to get a book produced? And each publisher is different. Each publisher offers a different funding model, financing model, and even within those publishing houses as well. Like pretty much every book deal can be different too. So it does depend on what kind of reputation you have. Do you have a working relationship with them already? Are you a new artist with some, like quality work, but really unverified work? Do you have a following? All these things kind of play into it. And I don't know if we want to speak specifically about projects that I've done and like my experience, which I'm fine and happy to do, or we can speak kind of in general terms.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
like if you're fine to talk about, like, even if we reference, say, like Crown Ditch, again, with this being such like a broad topic and so dependent on a number of different things, but I just think like, especially with my experience coming into this, and as I started to learn more and dive into this process, I realized that it's like an investment up front, like there can be, depending, I guess, on the way you try and fund it, but like, if we talk about Crown Ditch, like how did you approach that? And again, go as specific or as like unspecific as you want, but
no, yeah, this will be good. This will work. So, what I had done is reached out to a number of publishers and got back a few offers, but some of them were just like, there are vultures within this space, and I can think of a couple names, and I just won't say any. If anyone reaches out to me, I'd probably tell you in private. But one...
Sorry to cut you off, because obviously if you're working with a publisher, it's also a business for them, right? So, you aren't going to someone and they're just going to cover the cost. But it's like with any business, there's people who are going to operate differently than one another, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, and I mean, that is, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that, the people producing these books for you, it is a business to them. They have to make money, and there really is no money for them generally, or for the artist, the publisher and the artist. Like, it is almost wholly a labor of love for most, and that's just the reality. But there's no like madman offices and like fancy parties.
Again, you're just crushing me, man, with this conversation. Everything, all these hopes and dreams I had are just
You're never gonna hold a cigarette and a whiskey and wear a 3-piece suit. I don't think it's gonna happen. Sorry, Kyle. I know it's your thing. It's just not gonna happen.
Oh well, I'll have to work on accepting that.
Yeah, let the truth sink in as I speak. So. But yeah, okay, so there's one of the publishers that was interested in the work, they're like, I can't remember if it was $20,000 or $30,000 US, but it was a stupid amount.
And hang on,
That's
sorry,
what they wanted.
Just for a bit of context, with Crown Ditch, how many books did you produce total?
500.
500 books, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I think that was kind of where the discussion was when I was talking to this one publisher, and he was like, yeah, would love to do the book. But you actually start to look at the more recent works that they've put out, and you can see that there isn't a brand to the work, and it's very loose, and some of the books aren't of the same quality that they used to be. Because I have books from that publisher from more recently, and then also like from 8 years ago or 7 years ago, and there's a difference. And so that's something to be cognizant of too, because when people start to know that within the industry, and people that are collecting and people that are making work and other publishers will know that. And so it does actually kind of hurt your brand to pay a bunch of money to be with a publisher that is practicing pay to play operations, which is essentially what that is. And There's one in the States that does that. There's one in the UK that I know of that does that. So yeah, be very wary of that. But like, that's also the reality. It's like some of these publishers will ask you as the artist, like, they'll be like, hey, you know, like they'll pat you on the back, shake your hand. We really like your work. We want to produce it. Oh, you just need to give us $20,000 or $30,000.
And is this 20? And is this like, you give me that money, we'll make all the books?
Yeah, and we'll make the books. You give us that money, we'll make the books for you, and then you can have half to sell for yourself, and we'll keep the proceeds from the other half that we sell. And it's just like, it's ridiculous, and it's like very piranha-esque, I find. And you know, other deals will be different. The one with Ain't Bad was, I think we did. I paid for the entire book, the book in its entirety, which we used. I would say this was a bit of a mistake to use this really, really high quality printer in Holland, and the book just became too expensive. And then shipping it from Holland to where they were based, which was at that time in Georgia, Savannah, also very expensive. And so to date, that book came out in 2017, so it's been out for 3 years. I haven't made my money back on that one.
Oh, wow.
And that was also, yeah, that just didn't sell as well as my actual own work, because that Found Polaroids book was me kind of curating a selection of images and submitted short stories that people had to explain that, you know, who these random people were. So, you know, I think eventually, like, one day the money will be made back. But I mean, thinking about finances, and like, you got to ask yourself, like, do you want to try to break even? Are you okay with a loss? Do you want to make some money on this book? So for Crown Ditch, the idea was, let's just try to break even, because I think that's the way to find success when making a book.
For sure.
Is being able to break even, and then leveraging the fact that you have a book for other things.
Yeah.
It looks great if you want to start doing teaching. It's great to have a book.
Yep.
And if you want to, for galleries, if you want gallery shows, if you want to be selling work, then that's an avenue too. So some people will produce books just so that they can sell X number of dollars worth of prints in galleries. So there is that value, and you kind of have to, you know, figure that out. I don't know if it's worth $20,000 or $30,000. I'd say heck no. And you know, there was a couple authors from other publishers too, where it was kind of like, we'll make these books. We can, you know, this is the cost, and they were more, you know, economical, and they actually seemed like that was maybe a good option. But in the end, I went with the Velvet Cell, because we had kind of talked about, like, we'll do kind of a special edition run of 75 books, and we'll sell those before we make the book as a way to kind of fundraise for the book. And we'll give, you know, the people that purchase these some perks. And so that, combined with the fact that I knew this individual personally for a number of years and had, you know, become a very, very good friend, and the fact that we worked together on Out West, and it was a successful book, it did well, it kind of made sense to do the you know, this second chapter of this trilogy. And we're already, you know, we're going to do the third chapter together as well. We've already started talking about that. But so essentially, like, within, you know, we leveraged both my following and his following. We sold these 75 collector editions, and that we figured out the number, like how, you know, how to print, and I did like handwritten postcards for him. We figured out the math on it, and that was going to cover production and shipping. And that was a good start, because it took away most of the cost if these 75 sold. And they did, with, you know, quite quickly, within, I think, like 7 or 8 days. So very happy with that. And you know, there's other fees too. Like we had, it was like 1,500, was it euros for production as a production fee. And then I had to pay, like, first year of storage, which was maybe like 130 euros or $130. I can't remember. Shipping was a cost as well, because I actually wanted books to come to me. I got 53 through all of this. The long, like, we can run through the numbers more, but like the short answer to the long potential question is that that, you know, you can make money from a book. So we did, you know, we should have printed more, and we could have made a bunch more as well, because we did like a royalty split of like 50-50 or 60-40, I can't remember. And so, like, the book was out for 6 months, it sold out, and if I look at the numbers, I think I've made about 3,500. So it's okay. I mean, it's nothing to brag about. I'm not going and buying bottles of Dom Perignon or anything like.
You should treat yourself, man. Come on.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, and things change too. Like if we would have printed 750, that number would, because the margin, the actual cost of printing 250 more books. But we were also like being conservative because COVID was happening as we're trying to figure out how many we want to print. The market is saturated with books, so we're also thinking like, we sold out west when we made it in 2014 really quickly as well. But we're like, that was 6 years ago. There's so many more books now. So, so we capped it as a limited edition at 500. So we won't be producing anymore. And I think we might do the same for the next book. But there is like another thing that I've done, and I love the concept of it, is book exchanges. So I think it was about 25 book exchanges with Crown Ditch, and I would just reach out to photographers that I liked and said, hey, like, would you like to I'll swap you Crown Ditch for your book, and we'll just send them to each other. So that's $1,000 worth of books in value.
Yeah.
So, like all in all, there's probably about, I probably made about 5,000 on the book if we consider that as well, and still have some copies, like a very few. But finish
your thought.
Oh, I think to me that's actually success. And I mean, you might talk to other people and they might just break even, or they might be in the red, or they might make more from it. But managing expectations is very important. I think it's maybe a little sobering to like have a conversation with people and let them understand that like not much is made when you factor in the amount of work, like 3 years of on the road photographing, gas, hotel rooms every once in a while, mainly just sleeping in my car to cut down on the cost of film alone to develop all that film, and then time to edit it and put it all together. And you're not paying yourself for any of this. I mean, there's other ways to try to do that, like artist grants and whatnot, but it's a labor of love, and you do that because you are passionate about the project and you want it to exist, and you maybe want a little bit of legacy for yourself, or to be able to say that you've done something artistic. I don't know, but like you have to have internal drive, because if you're thinking that this is a means to an ends, it sometimes can be, but it's not the best financial decision.
Oh, for sure. And you know what? I'm glad that we talked about that and even got a little specific with numbers, just because, I mean, I think probably a large majority of people that are going into making a photo book are doing it as a labor of love in the first place. Yeah. I'm sure there are some people out there who are hoping to make money or whatnot. But like you said, when you break everything down, if you work that out hourly, when you take into consideration all the time spent. But it is cool to hear, that like, hey, the first one that you made, you went, production costs were a little too high, and you actually still haven't made your money back. But then the next one you did make some, and it is. And then also just talking about, different ways to approach production as well. It sounds like to me, it just comes down to trying to find a publisher to work with that has a model that fits whatever you are comfortable with and capable of as well. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about, I think a good way to kind of wrap this up, we've talked about kind of the entire process from start to finish, but one thing that I didn't maybe touch on or talk about with you, I kind of don't want people, like I think obviously pursuing like a photo book project is a really good idea, but I also don't want people to get the idea from this conversation that like you have to create a book right now. Like it's I think something that you probably want to just be patient with, right? And like make sure the idea you're pursuing is something you feel very strongly about. Like I've noticed it a little bit with people I've talked to who have got interested in like a specific genre of photography, and then like a couple weeks later they're like, I'm just really trying to figure out what the project is I'm working on, like trying to rush things. So like, what are your thoughts on that? Like obviously I think it's good to encourage people to pursue something like this, but you know what I mean? Like I also don't want to like push the fact that like do a book, you know what I mean? Like maybe not everyone needs to do one right away.
No, I mean, the market also is so saturated that the thing that the book used to do for you, it doesn't necessarily do anymore.
So build an Instagram page instead. That's what you're saying?
I don't even know if that does what it's supposed to do anymore. But I guess the point is, you're like, not every project is a book, and remembering that is very important. And you'll find out as you move through your process, if you are realistic and not blinded by it and your love of your own work, that maybe some things don't need to be photo books. Like, I definitely on my wall have projects that aren't photo books, and sometimes they're beautifully produced. Like, it's really nice, well designed, beautiful cover, beautiful paper, printing of the image is pristine, but it's just not a concept that should be a book. And it's an example. I mean, you learn quite quickly when you look at that the next time this person comes out with a book, you might not want to buy it, because this was them trying just to publish. And I think, people should, I mean, I've said it more than once, is not every project is a book.
Yeah.
And not every project needs to be a book, and not every photographer needs a book. Mm-hmm. It's so Jonesy to think that, that's kind of where things have gone, that, oh, they've got a book, so my next goal is to have a book like them. Let the project kind of decide. If you want to make a book, then the next step is to let the project decide if it warrants itself as a book, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, man. I think there's a lot of value in pursuing a project, even if maybe it doesn't end up being a book, even if it's just something like another portfolio for your website or something, where you can still, tie in some of those elements. You can curate and you can sequence images and stuff like that, but maybe it's, it doesn't have to go and be printed and published.
Yeah, I mean, and some stuff is honestly just, either for the website or your Instagram, or for your own self-interest and happiness. And some stuff is for magazines too. Like, projects, there's tons of good projects that are shot that aren't big enough to be a book, or they can't sustain themselves in a book format, but are lovely pieces to be pitching to magazines. And sometimes that's also a place that's like a middle point too. Produce the work, see if a magazine has interest, and then if you want to continue to build on that work, then think about doing a book later on.
Yeah. No, it's great, man. I love it. Okay, so to wrap things up then, if someone wants any of your books right now, they can't buy them because they're sold out. What comes out. So Out West obviously is sold. Crown Ditch is now wrapped up. That's sold out as well. Found Polaroids though, you can still get.
Yeah, you can still get a copy of that through Ain't Bad's website, and then hopefully next year the new book comes out. But that's been a project for me. We kind of talked about it earlier. Is like knowing when to stop, and I haven't felt that yet. And I have a shot list too, because it's a project that's become so expansive, even though it's looking at a specific small town, that I've had to break down page by page. Okay, like I need this image, this image, this image, and I'm slowly kind of working at paring down that, and then I have to go through an editing process. So yeah, hopefully next year there'll be a new book.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to see it, man, when it finally comes out.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks for doing this. And then if people want to find you, they can just find you on your website, on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram was fine. Yeah.
Sweet. I'll link to all that kind of stuff below in the description. And yeah, people should definitely check out your work, but I'll certainly promote it at the start and the end of this.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, man. Well, thank you for doing this, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, have a good one.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation and you got some value from it. My goal moving forward is just to spend a little more time talking about project-based work and shining a light on this kind of stuff, just to help anyone who's maybe struggling with their approach a little bit, and finding direction or finding meaning with their work and things like that. So I hope you got some value from this conversation. And if you aren't familiar with Kyler's work, definitely check out his website and his Instagram. I'll put those links below if you want to go and take a look. But as always, just want to say thanks for watching. I appreciate all the comments, all the support, all that kind of stuff. And I'll talk to you soon.